But as a matter of principle, can you really say it's wrong for China to reunify with Taiwan? No, you can't say that anymore.
Western media is abuzz with world-changing theories about President Trump's blatant and illegal oil grab in Venezuela earlier this week, suggesting that the US suddenly being honest about its foreign interventions and not pretending they were there for any other reason than benefiting the United States signals an imperialist switch in international politics that now means other nations will follow suit and march into other countries and regions at will just because they want to. So is that true? Will Russia now ramp up its military operations in the Ukraine? Will Australia take New Zealand? Or will Beijing now rush to reunify Taiwan Island and turn it into China's third special administrative region after Hong Kong and Macau? Well, US media personality Tucker Carlson asked that very question. Have international norms now changed that much? Today I'll ask my special guest, Adjunct Professor Warwick Powell from the Queensland University of Technology. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Borham here in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. It's been about 5 days since the United States invaded Venezuela, captured its president and his wife, and declared the country was now under US control. In the beginning, President Donald Trump tried to pretend the whole thing was in order to bring Maduro and his wife to face US courts because they allegedly engaged in narcotic terrorism. That facade quickly fell to the wayside during Trump's Mar-a-Lago media conference, in which he basically admitted that it was not the case. They did it all to seize control of Venezuela's oil resources. Now, don't get me wrong, US adventures in other countries, military or otherwise, have never been about human rights or freedom or democracy. That was just the pretext, a way to appease the public who might otherwise find such imperialism a little bit distasteful. But now, following the kidnapping of the leader of a sovereign nation and his wife, as well as the reported deaths of 80 people in the process, all of that sugarcoating is gone. They did it for the oil, and they admitted it, finally. And now, naturally, Western pundits are pontificating about whether or not the world has changed this week. Will other world leaders now do the same thing, militarily invade other countries and regions and kidnap their leaders just because they have something they want? Sure, it wouldn't surprise me if Australia invaded New Zealand for our resources. I mean, they already stole the pavlova, the flat white, and the lamington. US commentator Tucker Carlson is wondering whether it will mean Beijing now rushes in to take control of Taiwan Island. Let's check out what he had to say, and when we're done, we'll get Professor Warwick Powell's opinion.
But what makes what happened in Venezuela, taking the head of state out of the presidential palace with Delta Force and bringing him to New York and putting him on trial, what makes that so very different from, say, I don't know, pick one, killing Mossadegh in 1953 in Iran or whatever, is that the U.S. government, the President of the United States, basically just said, we're doing this because of the resources. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserve in the world. It's in our hemisphere. It's going to China. And how about no? This is our hemisphere. It's going to go to us. He just said it out loud. So once you say out loud, we're grabbing Venezuela because we're annoyed they're selling what is our oil to the Chinese, our rival, once you just say that out loud, and again, it's good to be honest, but once you are honest, it's kind of hard to make the case that, well, for example, Russia doesn't have an interest in what happens in eastern Ukraine. Why would it be wrong for China to retake Taiwan? The U.S. government already acknowledges that Taiwan is part of China. We have a so-called one China policy, and yet simultaneously we suggest we would defend Taiwan against Chinese aggression. But wait a second, Taiwan is Han Chinese, same people, same language, tons of cultural similarities. We want the microchips in Taiwan. We hope it doesn't happen because it would give China greater leverage over the United States. But as a matter of principle, can you really say it's wrong for China to reunify with Taiwan? No, you can't say that anymore.
Professor Warwick Powell, welcome back to the show. I quite like Tucker's realization there that Taiwan is very much Chinese, same language, same people, same culture. And I need to point out, obviously, there are massive differences between the Taiwan question and what happened in Venezuela, least of all being that Taiwan is a domestic issue. But apart from that, do you agree with Tucker that the world has switched and now other world leaders might start going around acting like Donald Trump?
No, I don't think they will, and that's for the basic reason that, in fact, the world hasn't really switched in such a dramatic way. What's dramatic about the Venezuelan event is how explicit President Trump has been about the underlying reasons for it, and he hasn't even bothered sugarcoating it with the usual liberal rhetoric around human rights and democracy promotion, etc., etc. The United States has, for all of its history, been a heavily militarized country. Between 1946 and 1989, it initiated 2.4 military interventions on average per year. And between 1990 and 2019, that actually jumped to 3.7 military interventions per year on average, according to data that's discussed in detail by American scholars in their book called Dying by the Sword. So in that regard, the United States' most recent behavior in relation to Venezuela is historically normal. The other point to remember in relation to Latin America in particular is that the US has, for many decades, played an active role in intervening in the politics of the countries in that continent. And it has done so largely to secure control of resources and to install governments that are, quote, friendly to the Americans. In large part, that's meant weeding out so-called leftists, and it has done so with impunity. So in that regard, I don't think we actually have entered into a particularly new phase of anything at all. There is no reason why other countries would somehow see this as a new signal that international norms have changed and that they can go about wantonly doing whatever it is that they wish to do. The last point I'll make here, Andy, is that other countries actually still continue to subscribe to the idea that international relations should be grounded in sensible norms and behaviours, including a respect for national sovereignty. In other words, other countries, such as China, are going to work tirelessly to maintain the stability of the global system based on the idea of independent nation states, and they will continue to respect those norms as enshrined in the United Nations Charter. China will, I think, see this as an opportunity, so to speak, to promote and reinforce its position as a stabilizing force globally.
So what kind of change do you think it might signify for the United States domestically then? I mean, we've already heard Trump suggesting more military adventures in probably 5 other countries this week. So do you think he and his administration are going to get more emboldened and maybe we can expect more invasions next week or the week after?
Well, he's certainly spoken explicitly about other nations in Latin America. And of course, we have Greenland, and he has spoken also longingly for Canada to become the 51st state of the United States. I think you raise an interesting question, and that is the issue of the domestic situation. And clearly, there are many across the United States who are actually shocked and horrified by this behavior. The mythology of America as the light on the hill has come crashing down because Trump hasn't even bothered to sugarcoat the interventions in Venezuela. This is going to have lasting fallout across the American body politic, particularly in 2026 as a midterm election year. Trump's opposition will, of course, be mobilizing around this question of America's standing in the world and the extent to which America should actually conduct itself as the global policeman, intervening willy-nilly without any constraints on its own behavior. President Trump himself has said that the only constraint is his own personal sense of morality and nothing else. He's thrown international law under the bus explicitly, and the United States and the world are now really exposed to a capricious presidency that's willing to do anything and everything to address his political problems. His domestic political problems are mounting up. He has many issues that he's been seeking to distract the domestic population on, and I think, sadly, the interventions in Venezuela, in part, are part of this distraction operation.
Yeah, I think I saw Trump even said explicitly that no international law can stop him, which is quite shocking. I want to go back now, if I can, to Tucker's comments on Taiwan, because I did find what he said quite refreshing if we put Venezuela as a factor aside. Now, he mentioned there that the US already recognizes Taiwan as part of China, which is true. And then he went on to describe similar culture and language and so on. Basically, he admitted that Taiwan is really quite Chinese. So do you think those comments might shock some of his US viewers who perhaps don't even know where Taiwan is on a map, let alone that the US already recognized it as part of China?
I'm sure it'll surprise and shock many of his viewers. Many Americans, I think, have been raised in a propagandized environment that has created the impression that the island of Taiwan is a distinct country in and of its own right. It's never been a distinct country prior to the Second World War, and of course after the Second World War, let alone after the conclusion on the mainland of the Civil War. The fact that Taiwan Island continues to be administered separately from Beijing is simply a consequence of an unfinished civil war. In 1949, when the Communist Party of China basically succeeded on the mainland, the KMT, the main opposition at the time, retreated to Taiwan Island with a clear view that they would use that position, together with the support of the United States, to rebuild its forces and take the mainland back. Until the 1970s, the United States actually supported the administration based on the island as the sole legitimate government of China, all of China, one China. And it changed that position in the 1970s, together with the United Nations, that recognized, instead of the Republic of China as the sole legitimate government of the single China, that Beijing, the People's Republic of China, would now occupy that position. The Civil War question remains unresolved, in large part because the skirmishes that took place in the decades after 1949 were never decisive. Neither side on the Straits were in a position to successfully prosecute whatever their ambitions were, whether it was to sail over the Straits and to defeat the nationalists on the island, or for the nationalists to reclaim the mainland. And as time went by, the Civil War kind of calmed down, but the Civil War remains unresolved. There is no peace treaty, there is no armistice, and to this day, both sides of the Taiwan Straits recognize one China only, and the only outstanding question is who administers the entirety of China, including the island of Taiwan.
Definitely a lot for a lot of people to get their heads around. Professor Warwick Powell, thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure to be with you.
And on that note, that will be all for today, you guys. But as always, I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the world changed following Trump's operation in Venezuela? And do world leaders now have carte blanche permission to act with impunity? Do let me know down below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.